My name is Tony Phelan, Associate Director of Alumni and Parent Engagement at Macalester. This is our Curious About Careers Living and Working Abroad. And so we've got some great panelists lined up for you all today. Just so you know, I'm going to kick it off with the first question, but please, after that, students jump in with your questions. If you're comfortable unmuting yourself or using the raise your hand feature, that's totally fine. You can also type questions into the chat or privately chat them to me if you don't want to ask them yourself, and I can anonymously ask it for you if you feel more comfortable with that. And then if you're having any technical issues, you can privately chat me, or Stuart is also on the call, so he can help you with that stuff as well. Let's kick it off with, oh, and just a side note, we are recording. So if at any point you don't want to be on the recording, you can turn off your mic and camera, and that should make it so that you don't show up on the
I think we lost Tony for a second there, but why don't we just have the panelists introduce themselves? Eric, would you be willing to start?
recording part of this. Eric.
Oh.
Sure. Am I kicking it off? Thanks so much, Stuart and Tony. Hey, everyone. It is great to see you. I love this topic. I so clearly remember sitting in your seat and trying to figure out exactly how I was going to find a career overseas. My name's Eric Berman. I'm the parent of a second year at Macalester, and I am currently the head of public affairs at Universal Music. So we're the largest music company in the world. We're in about 60 countries globally. I look after all the public policy and government relations. And Stuart, if you'll bear with me for a minute, I'll dive in a little bit on my background if that's acceptable. On one hand, I would say that I'm probably about the worst one to give you all some advice on working and living abroad. I mean, first of all, right now I live in New York and I work for an American company, but I'm here to tell you a little bit about what I do for a living, because one of the messages I really want to impart is don't get trapped into thinking that there's just one narrow path to a career working abroad. I came through a circuitous route myself. I started out when I was your age. I was insistent that I was going to join the Foreign Service to see the world. I dreamed of joining the State Department, negotiating treaties to resolve conflicts everywhere. I majored in international relations. I spent summers working abroad. I interned at the State Department. I wrote my thesis on the Cyprus crisis of '74, and I took the Foreign Service exam, and I didn't pass the section on diagramming sentences, and I didn't get a posting overseas. And at that point, I sent my thesis to a Democratic staffer on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, a guy named George Stephanopoulos, turns out. And George introduced me to Paul and Ringo, who are a couple of political consultants named Paul Begala and James Carville. And they saw a Jewish guy from New Jersey, and he told them that he wanted to work in a foreign land, so they sent me to Texas and Arkansas. And there we ended up meeting a governor of a small southern state. We created a political tool called the War Room, and we rode it all the way to the White House. And the world paid attention. And one of the things that we did in that effort was we did an outreach to the world. And that was, I think, a large part of who we were and what we wanted to accomplish, and the background that you brought in and bringing the sensitivity. We had public leaders from all over the world who frankly were with us in Little Rock, Arkansas. And we went on a little bit of a world tour after that campaign, and it kind of set the tone for what I wanted to do when I got done with 10 years in domestic politics in the US. I joined a firm in New York where we work with businesses all over the world. I counseled leaders in Argentina, businesses in Brazil. I commuted to Brazil for a good bit of time from New York. It was something new, but then there was one client that was kind of special that offered me an opportunity to frankly work abroad consistently, and that was Universal Music. And one of the things that I love about my job is that music is universal, as we say. There's a universality, and one of the things that it, first of all, we should talk about COVID later and what that means and how it affects all of us. I, for the last 5 years, have spent more time in foreign countries than I have in the U.S. I travel. I advocate for artists and for songwriters. Each country is different, and so just in the way that we should talk about, there's no single path to success. What you're doing in a liberal arts background, I'm here to tell you, is exactly the right way to do this. The open mindset that we need to have as music executives coming in and talking to folks all over the world. We have to celebrate differences and embrace the best from all the different cultures that we work in. It is not only a good thing to do, frankly, it's the best business thing to do. We sell more music from local repertoire than we do from imported repertoire, and that's an important lesson. The other lesson that I think is super important in terms of the mindset is that we now have an opportunity with the digitalization of music to talk to people all over the world. We now have kids listening to J Balvin who don't speak Spanish. We have artists, whether that's a Burna Boy or a BTS or a Blackpink. These are crossing the world. And so part of what we're doing is really celebrating the differences and using our, frankly, liberal arts education to the fullest. The final thing that I'll say, because I talk about music all day, but obviously you're not defined by your first job. So I would say mix it up over the course of your career. Have fun. The fact that I didn't get into the Foreign Service turned out to be a great blessing. I have the greatest job in the world right now. I wouldn't trade it for anything except maybe to be home with my wife and family a little bit more. But mix it up over the course of your career. If you find yourself in a domestic position, I'm on a couple of boards. Those of you who are involved in peace building, and we should talk about that. I'm on the board of Search for Common Ground, an amazing organization. And so even as I sat in New York working on IPOs or mergers and acquisitions, still staying engaged in the foreign international affairs space, super important. So we should talk not only about your paying job, but also your non-paying jobs as well. And so I'll turn it over, or I'll go all day, but I'm thrilled to be here. Can't wait to talk about some of those key points and how you guys are gonna find your path too.
Thank you, Eric. Sorry again for dropping off there for a second, everyone. But Ziza, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my career trajectory is probably not yet quite as exciting as Eric's, but I graduated 7 years ago, and I have been living in Germany and Austria since then. That's where I studied abroad, and it just made me realize I wanted to come back. I heard study abroad was canceled, which is very sad. But there are a lot of opportunities. So I took a more classic route, and I will, throw the caveat out there that I do have German citizenship, which has made my journey a lot easier in some regards, but there still have been, a lot of challenges. So that has made one element easier, but it's definitely still possible to move and work abroad, even if you're not a citizen of the country or continent you're trying to go to. So after graduating from Macalester, I went to Vienna, Austria, where I was a US teaching assistantship, which is kind of like a fake Fulbright. And I was with a really mixed group of people. So some people who were there because they really, really wanted to go to Austria. They were really interested. Maybe they had studied Austrian history in undergrad. And then there were also a lot of people who, for example, didn't get the chance to study abroad in college. And so this was their opportunity to just kind of leave the country after graduation, see what it's like to live in another country. And I think it's also interesting to Eric's point about your first job not defining you. I remember when I was there for the first year, I was thinking about extending for a second year, and I was like, oh, well, I kind of had this path and this plan, and 2 years as a USTA, like, oh, I don't know, that's not really related to my career. And like, what is that going to be a waste of time? And I mean, I only graduated 7 years ago, but already I'm just like, what the heck was I thinking? I'm very happy where I ended up 7 years later. And I think sometimes, at Mac, we have this mentality of like, if you don't meet your goal immediately, you are a complete failure. And look at all these people, founding NGOs and like changing the world. And if you're not doing that, like, well, that's too bad. So I think definitely just having that perspective of, doing what you need to do to get your foot in the door, and sometimes just taking opportunities because they sound like fun, even if they're not going to change the world right away. So then after my 2 years in Vienna, I decided to go to grad school in Germany because, to be frank, it was kind of the best transition to going back to my like kind of substantive background, I suppose, because I studied German and political science, but my academic professional interest has always been politics and public policy. So grad school, it wasn't that I, thought I had like wasn't educated enough at Macalester, but rather in Germany, there's just this expectation that people have grad degrees, and I knew it'd be a good kind of networking opportunity, getting some internship work experience in German and in Germany. And then once I finished that, I moved to Berlin, which is where I'm now living and working. And I've been working in the German parliament for 2.5 years now. And I started out working for a member of parliament in a subject area that I was completely uninterested in, sports policy, which I don't do sports. So that was, it was a foot in the door. And now for the past year, I've been working in the field of human rights and humanitarian aid. And, it's frustrating at times. It's not always great. But it's a really exciting job. And I'm just really grateful that I've made it this far, that I've been able to start a career in a foreign country. And if you had told me that, 7 years ago when I was graduating from Macalester, that one day I'd be working in the Bundestag, I would have, and so soon too, I would have never believed you. But I think my journey has just shown me that it is possible if you go after your goals. And of course, like, you have to have a certain element of luck. Like, I absolutely got lucky in a lot of regards, but also like I just kind of got over all my fears and applied for jobs and tried to find a way to make it work. And I think that, I don't know any of you personally, but I'm sure that you're all very smart and capable. And so, like, if you want this to happen, like, I guarantee you there's a way that you can make it work.
Love that. Thank you so much. And Nellie, if you would give your intro.
Sure. So my name is Nellie. I currently live and work here in Shanghai in China. So my path was kind of similar to yours, Tessa. You studied abroad, I think, right? During your time at Macalester. So I in 2010, I studied abroad in Beijing. And I loved it. I fell in love with China and Beijing. And I was studying Chinese at the time as well. I was auditing classes at Macalester and just fell in love with Beijing. So I ended up, after my semester abroad in the spring semester, I ended up actually also staying and spending the summer in Beijing. So I ended up spending around 8 months total in Beijing, and then decided that I had to come back. So decided that after I graduated from Macalester, so in 2011, I came back to China, and actually ended up doing my master's here in China as well. So I did my master's in I ended up getting a master's in the School of Public Policy and Management at Tsinghua University. And so I graduated from my master's in 2015. I ended up studying abroad through my master's and so I studied abroad in France, in Paris, at the the Paris School of International Affairs. So I did do a semester in Paris through my study at Tsinghua, and then came back and then started working in the international education industry. So primarily working in different aspects, but working with international students planning to study abroad and do their higher education in the US primarily, but a little bit also in the UK. And then ended up moving to Shanghai 2.5 years ago. So I've been here ever since. I worked for a business school for 2.5 years. So I worked for a business school called HALT International Business School. They're a global business school with 6 campuses globally. So I did their student recruitment and their, partly admissions process as well for students applying from China. So both international and or young professionals applying from within mainland China. So yeah, that's currently my history. So I've been in China for approximately 10 years, and I live here with my fiance and my dog. So if you see my dog crouching into the view of the camera, sorry about that. It's quite late here as well. So if I don't know if you can tell, but it's 11:20 p.m. in the evening. So yeah, just keep that in perspective.
Thank you. We appreciate you joining us so late at night, and we are more than happy to welcome pets into the conversation. Well, thank you all. I'm going to kick it off with the first question, but again, students feel free to type your questions into the chat, or you can always unmute yourself after this first one or use the raise your hand feature. So, and students, I don't know if you heard me say, because I froze, if you have a question that you want to ask, you can chat it to me privately and I can ask it anonymously as well. So you have that option. So I want to kick it off. What you all kind of had a little bit of this in your intro, but for a student who is wanting to work internationally at some point or live internationally at some point, and I know everyone's situation is going to be slightly different, but what are some things that they can be doing while they are a student, aside from the obvious study away, especially because that may not be an option right now for a lot of people? What are some other things that they can be doing, whether that's classes they should take, internships they could look into, just kind of some ways to set themselves up for success?
Yeah, sure. I think definitely for China, if any students are specifically interested in China or Asia, but specifically a country, even as Tessa mentioned, kind of Germany, a country where you know that English is not necessarily going to be the go-to language. I think definitely learning studying the language and the culture is really important. I think that will definitely give you the upper hand, and that will also just, even if you don't speak it fluently, because Chinese is a hard language. I feel like German was quite hard for me to, I don't think I do speak French and Spanish as well, but in terms of, Chinese is much harder than that. But even if you speak a little bit, it does go a long way as well. So just keep in mind that people really respect that you've at least attempted to learn their language, and that can be a big part of business, or if your plan is to maybe do business in China, for example. I speak a lot with people that are also considering that in the future. So yeah.
Yeah, to echo off of that, I can really only emphasize how important it is to learn a language. And, living in Berlin, like I do have a lot of friends who are maybe, British or American, who don't speak German very well. And, in this city, you can get by, but you are just a lot more limited. And unfortunately, I think, of course, like, if you're living in an international city, you can expect to get by with English. But I think that if you really want to stay somewhere long term, like it is really advisable to learn the language. And just, I unfortunately do see in a lot of like circles, people just kind of the sense of entitlement of like, why should I learn German? I speak English. Everyone speaks English. And I think, there are probably cities or countries where that's even more like, like I think in Stockholm, maybe you really can get by with English. But I just do think it's a bit absurd to expect people to completely, accommodate you, especially if you want to do something like working in politics, which is what I do. Like, if you're working at an international tech firm or startup or something like that, I can understand getting by with English, and I think you really can. But especially if you're doing something that really involves understanding the culture and the situation that you're working in, I do think it's reasonable. And yeah, it's a huge challenge. I spent, years at Macalester working on my German. My German is still not perfect, but it did give me a solid foundation. And another thing that I would add, if you can't physically leave the country, and maybe you're working on a language, one thing you can do is get involved in extracurriculars that have kind of an international focus and an international perspective. And I feel like that's a great way to just learn more about different countries, maybe meet friends who are from different countries and hearing about their personal experiences, and also just learning about the world. So One thing that I was really involved in at Macalester was Model United Nations. And I continued doing that even after I graduated, like up until last year, which is kind of odd, but volunteered for it. I was no longer like pretending to be a country. But I'm really grateful for that experience because I do feel like it taught me so much about international politics, for example, which does play a role in my actual job. So just seeking out opportunities, whether I don't know what clubs are still at Macalester, but for example, we did Oxfam at Macalester. So thinking about international development issues from an American political perspective and doing advocacy work. I think that there are a lot of ways to, kind of think globally, but act locally. I know I did not come up with that, but I do think that there are a lot of ways, especially with student engagement, that you can do that.
I'd echo those points. One other thing that I'd say is take advantage of everything that's on campus that you have. Find yourself. When you follow your passions, I have a passion for sports and music, and I can tell you that there's a universality across humankind. If you're passionate about something, I would love Cesa's old job, working on sports policy in the Bundestag. There's something about showing up in a foreign country with a soccer ball and going to the park and finding your people. Same thing is true with music. Obviously, what we share transcends even language, and there's something that's incredibly special about that. And I think that if you bring that passion, what you find and who you are, and frankly, I think I made the error because what I did was I was so committed to finding something internationally that I wasn't finding something that I really was passionate about. And so my failure to get into the Foreign Service was the best thing that happened to me. My international experience has been much richer because it's been informed by my passions. So I think there's so much that Nellie and Cesa said that is critical and absolutely 100% agree. I would add on it is find you and do you, and to the extent that you're embracing something in another culture, you can hear it in Nellie's voice when she talks about what she found in China. That's what you really want to find, is tap into that, what you really enjoy, and find your passion in yourself. So there's so many great cultures. There's so much to see. If you find the one that speaks to you, the rest will follow. You'll be able to speak German as well as Cesa.
Great, thank you all. Great advice there. So I've gotten a couple of questions in the chat. I'm gonna kind of combine them because they're similar. How do you start with a job search for a specific country or area if it's somewhere that you've never been but want to explore? And then there was a specific question similar to that around Western Europe. So if any of you have advice in general about job searching in a specific country, and then specifically if you have any advice about Western Europe, that would be great too.
I can start. So I think for one, when it comes to, wanting to move to a country that you've never been before, like I think that that's a really brave thing to do. And I think that's a great goal. I would say make sure that you're really doing your research on that country and thinking about why you want to live there. So I can't completely speak to that experience because I mostly had been to the places that I've lived. But I do see a lot of people moving, for example, to Berlin with this idea in their head of what Berlin is. And then they come here and they get hit with a very different reality. So that's not to discourage you by any means, but it just means, make sure that you do your research. And I think that you'll also have a lot higher chances of success because if you have a job interview and your interviewer sees you've never been to this country, you have no connection, they're really going to wonder, what makes you actually want to move here? Why would you really be willing to root up your life to come work for us? And are you going to stay? So I think thinking about that is really important. And I would also say Mac alumni are a really, really great resource. So that was something that when I was still a student, especially in my fourth year, when I was getting really serious saying, I want to make this happen. I want to move to Germany or maybe Austria. I reached out, I looked at the database, found out, are there Mac alumni living in Germany, especially ones that work in my field. And I did end up connecting with 2 or 3. And I was able to get really concrete advice from them about what it's like working in Germany, if they have ideas of like what grad school programs I could look at or where jobs are posted, because that's something that if you don't know what you're looking for, it can be really challenging. To generalize for Western Europe, I think it's a bit difficult just because I don't know what kind of job you're looking for. But I would definitely say like reaching out to people who know the country is probably the easiest, and the best way to do that is reach out to Mac alum. And I had really positive experiences with people, or even someone who had studied what I was considering studying, and asking them, what's it like to study public policy, and like would you recommend that, even if they didn't have a European connection.
So I'd just add on to say, so obviously I've spent most of the last few years in and around Western Europe. We have a huge piece of legislation that we've been working on, and God willing, the Bundestag will be helpful to me and good to all the music creators. But I would say this: in addition to finding the geography that you're passionate for, I really do think it's so important, and Cesa alludes to this in her comments, to find what is going to ground you, what is going to make you really feel passionate about what it is that you're doing. If I were to go to, I love Paris. It's one of my favorite places on the planet. If I were to show up in Paris and work for a widget manufacturer, I would be miserable and I would be gone. So I would say, find what it is that you love. I love public policy. I love the debates. I love the legislative process. I love the politics, and that transcends many of the borders. And obviously, the politics in each region are specific. They reflect the culture. You have to get in and love the culture and appreciate the culture. You have to be respectful of the culture. But at the end of the day, that's what's going to drive you much more so than even just being in a particular geography. It's what you're doing every day and what you're doing with yourselves. And I have to say that one of the things that I love about my job is just to touch a little bit on COVID and thinking about the fact that I'm physically distant from the countries that I've been visiting so much, whether that's India or China, Japan. I've been gone from Western Europe for months, and yet one of the things about the jobs that we can do now, and frankly, I hope one of the things that we can see as a silver lining is when I get up in the morning, I get up in time to talk to my friends in Western Europe, which means it's early in the United States, and by 10 in the morning, I've typically spoken to 4 continents, and it's an incredible opportunity. It's so different from when we are in more normal times, and we get to be physically present, which is obviously the best. But don't give up, even if you can't travel. It is thrilling and exciting to be in constant conversation and touching base with folks all over the world, even when you're not physically there. You can still accomplish so much, and I would urge you, don't lose your international mindset. Don't lose your global mindset. Keep that. Make the most of it, even when we are physically distant. So I just wanted to add that coda. Sorry, Nellie.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing, you guys. Just to add a little bit onto that, because I saw in the notes a mention of going global, which I'm not familiar with, but I like that it says it's a resource for international jobs and internships. So that actually reminded me that internships are a great way to kind of, I think, in terms of just not putting too much pressure on the fact that it needs to be a full-time or a paid job, that there are opportunities that are, getting your foot in the door is really important, and exploring your interests and your passions, and that it might not be a job with, the expected salary that you're expecting, or the ideal location. Maybe you'll be in China, but you're not going to be starting in Shanghai. You'll start in Kunming, or you'll start in Shenzhen, or you'll start in, right, you'll start in Nanjing or whatever. So you could be in another city, but that can help you to transition into Shanghai for, the following year, or things like that. So I have a lot of friends that they started their job, they were actually not in Shanghai, but Shanghai was maybe their ideal location, but they were able to kind of, do that later on. So I think just keeping an open mind, as everyone here has said, is that, don't put too much pressure on that job or, the internship. Just get your foot in the door. Sometimes that's always a good place to start. The other thing would be, definitely, I agree, LinkedIn is a great resource as well, to connect with Mac alumni. So a lot of people actually over the years, because I've lived in China for so long, that people reach out to me and they're like, hey, I'm, a student at Macalester. I'm going to actually be studying abroad there. What are your thoughts? Or, oh, I'll be in Beijing. So people reach out to me, on LinkedIn a lot, through the Macalester connection, which is great. And yeah, so just definitely use that LinkedIn, to connect with other Macalester people out there. And then, yeah, also feel free to, when you're researching different countries, that's also a great resource for you. Reach out to people that, are already there, that have had experience working there, because they can really tell you what are the job sites, because it's so distinctive. It's so different. Like China, there are job sites that, I don't use Indeed, which I was like, Indeed, I don't think I've ever, So, I mean, it's just, making sure you're actually looking at the relevant, country related links and job sites and internship sites, right? That's definitely important. Yeah, so I think that's all from me.
Great, thank you. Students, anyone want to pop in with a question? Otherwise, I have one. Okay, I will ask another one as you all are thinking. So Eric, you kind of started talking about this, but I would love to know kind of how COVID has affected your work, affected how you do your work, especially with that international lens. So the big question we're all talking about right now.
Well, just obviously it's been it's for someone who's an advocate, it's very difficult to speak with policymakers in other countries. They don't particularly like being lobbied by Zoom, and so it's incredibly difficult. What it really leads to is there are a lot of efforts where we have to delegate to our teams on the ground, and so it has led to a lot more coordination, discussion, things like that. I mean, we're dealing in music. We're dealing with highly complex issues at a time when so much of the music industry is under extreme duress. Obviously, our friends in the live sector are many without jobs. There are many of the music venues are in jeopardy of disappearing, and this is again this is across the world. So these are really urgent times. The advantage of having a large global company is that we can work across lines. It's been in many ways inspiring to see the way that we can get on a Zoom, talk to our friends in Croatia or in Malaysia or Brazil, and rally the team. And so people have had to jump into things that maybe weren't first nature for them. But there's no getting around the fact it's incredibly difficult. It is painful for folks, but I think one of the things, just to touch on what Nellie was talking about, internships. And by the way, I should add that if you go to umg.com, that we've got a career section on our website that is broken out geographically, and so you can find all kinds of internship opportunities and also employment opportunities that we're working on globally. But there is an incredible need for interns in all different places as people can move. The interns are really getting a lot more responsibility to do things in their geography, and I know that's true at the NGOs that where I served on the board, and so would hope that it is for everyone too. So it makes us work a little bit harder, but obviously these are special times, and encourage everyone to stay engaged. Don't get discouraged. This too shall pass, and staying connected through the crisis is incredibly important. So don't give up hope.
Yeah, I can also go. So I feel really grateful that my job has been really accommodating of COVID, in the sense of, the party that I work for, they've always been big proponents of, working from home and digitalization and whatnot. So I do have, the technical requirements to work from home. But I will say my job has become a lot less fun, because like the exciting part of working in politics is going to meetings, going to events, learning about new things, talking to interesting people, and that is by and large gone. So that is a bit of a bummer. And politically, it also, especially in April, March, when things were really escalating. I mean, from my perspective of human rights, COVID is a human rights crisis as well. And we saw so many leaders around the world using COVID as an excuse, and the pandemic as an excuse to further restrict human rights, but no one cared because everyone was freaking out about the pandemic, rightfully so. So we do see things normalizing a bit politically now, where it's, obviously we do have, what are the latest restrictions in terms of Corona, like who's allowed to travel where, and that takes up a lot of space in newspapers, but like people are being interested in international topics again, which is what I more work on. But on a very personal level, it's obviously, of course, like one of the biggest challenges of living abroad and working abroad. It means that you're away from your family. And so that has been really hard for me personally. Just sometimes, like, today I'm hanging out at home literally all day. It's raining and I'm just like, oh, this is great. I don't know when I'm going to see my family again. And I don't know if I'm going to hang out with friends after work because there's a pandemic. So I think that's definitely can sometimes be the downside of being abroad, is you're already like just far away from a lot of people. Like I do have, a good network here of friends. So I appreciate that. But I think then just the COVID pandemic, I'm sure you've all felt it as well. It's just like all those things that were kind of already negative sides of living abroad have just really, really been enlarged by the pandemic. But on the other hand, I do feel grateful to live in a country that's taken it seriously. So that is an advantage. But yeah, it's sometimes just hard.
Yeah, interestingly, obviously, I'm in China. So back in December, I'd heard about, I'd heard whispers in Wuhan about things happening there back in December, because I have friends that are, one of my best friends is from Wuhan. And so, yeah, but of course, things in China, obviously, we were the first ones to move everything to online. So back in January was Chinese New Year. Chinese New Year is like a big holiday in China. So we had essentially 2 weeks off. And then, that's when it kind of escalated because everyone was traveling, everyone was going abroad because, it's our one holiday to really go big. So that's when everyone was just moving. I decided I had done Christmas, which is not a holiday. So I'd taken annual leave during Christmas and went to France. My mom lives in France. So she's retired there. So I actually went home for Christmas. So I decided over Chinese New Year, I was going to stay still. I was going to stay. A lot of my friends didn't, and they chose it to go abroad. So then all of a sudden, COVID happens. And it gets bad in other places outside of China. So all my friends are traveling and decide that it's safer to be abroad actually than China, because at that point China had gotten bad. But other countries were still kind of, it was still okay. So a lot of my friends went back to the US. A lot of people left China and essentially were not planning to come back. So I decided I was going to stay in China because I trusted in China, and I've lived in China for 10 years. I know the culture, I know, it very well. And I was like, China's going to be very, very, they're gonna essentially, enforce the rules to make sure that it is dealt with. And I trusted that. So I actually told my friends, I was like, I actually disagree with you. I think China's gonna, you should actually stay here, don't travel. A lot of people didn't listen to me, so they got stuck in other countries because China then put the ban, which meant that, essentially people were stuck. And then anyone that had a job here, anyone that had, not moved out completely, they essentially, their pets or whatever were actually stuck here in China. So the ban has been slowly lifted. So there are exceptions now, like if you have a residence permit, but US is quite tricky. But anyways, the point is, we were the first ones to actually live, to move, so we were living, we were working from home. And then by March, we went back to the office. So I've been working from an office since March. Yeah, so it's kind of the opposite. Like everyone, we kind of dealt with it first, and then China just cracked down on everything, and then everything's been fine since then. So China is like quite normal, which is, I know, weird because for everyone else it's not normal. But so yeah, I mean, things are normal. I I personally like working from home, actually. So I really enjoyed working from home, but I can imagine doing it for 6 months, like instead of 2 or 3 months, as we did it here in China, would be frustrating. But like you guys mentioned, I think with COVID, I think it really did impact my industry, which is education, because of course, as a Hult is a business school, so a lot of our Chinese students who were planning to do their masters in the US, which many of them were, actually decided to either start in a different country like the UK, or decided, so with US relations, US-China relations, people kind of were worried about going to the US at all. So a lot of students deferred. So it was a very difficult year for us as a business school to operate and to kind of think more strategically. So what we ended up doing is actually offered online as a start. So students could start their classes online for the first semester or the first, for the first term, and then choose to, as things, the situation, to hopefully got better, students could choose to then do their classes on campus. So we essentially had to, come up with other solutions, but it was a very tricky year. I knew a lot of my friends in the education industry lost their jobs. It was a very, very, very difficult year for China, specifically Chinese planning to go to the US to study abroad, or to continue their higher education. So yeah, so definitely a big impact. And education is actually the second largest industry in China in terms of job opportunity, like in terms of hiring. So when the education industry is impacted, it actually has a huge drastic effect on the jobs. So yeah.
Thank you all. More great information. So I've got some questions in the chat, which is great. One of them is, how do you build a resume for a specific country? And I know I dropped a link in the chat to Going Global, and I know there are resources on there. Macalester students should have access. You can log in through Handshake. But any advice from the three of you on, and if you don't have any, that's totally fine, but anything that comes up around building resumes?
Yeah, so German resumes are really weird, and it's a really, really, really different standard. Like, you have your picture on there, you have your date of birth, you have your marital status, which are all things that I'm pretty sure would be illegal in America. But that's the kind of thing where it's like you need to do your research, because if you try applying for German jobs with an American resume with all your bullet points, which is also just like, I think it's changing a little bit. It's becoming a bit more like Americanized, but a lot of places they have very traditional, like you have a 3-page like CV again with your picture, and then like literally every job you've ever done, but like no information about it, which is just so different from, you know, the American resume format. So you definitely just need to do your research at like Googling, you know, resume or CV for this country. And the best thing that you can do is if you can, you know, even find like a McAllister alum or something, someone to review your resume and be like, are there red flags for the country that I'm applying to that I might not notice? And I know that, for example, like some people say, you know, I don't think it's right to have my picture. I don't want to be discriminated against based on my appearance. And like, I totally understand that, but it means that you're going to be discriminated against because you don't have a picture. So it's one of those things where it's like, those are kind of the rules of the game, and you have to choose to either follow them or like do your own thing and then see what happens. But that, I remember the first time I was making a dream resume, it's just like, what on earth is this kind of process? And I can't say I love it, but oh well.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. Like in China, the pictures there, you know, you have like a lot of that information, which again, in the beginning, it's kind of shocking because you're like, well, you know, this is kind of infringing on, you know, my rights, and I don't know if, you know, I feel comfortable disclosing this kind of information. I think in China, I also see a lot of like HR recruiters kind of asking for specific. So if you're already in the country, it's great to include your visa status because, you know, in China, it is really hard to get the work visa. It's gotten tighter. The restrictions have actually gotten more and more difficult over the years. Like 10 years ago, it was super easy to get a visa for work or business. Now it's really hard. So just making sure that if you do have any kind of, you know, advantage, or, you know, so thinking about kind of, you know, if you have Chinese language skills, definitely highlighting that, or anything that will help you to get a visa if you've studied abroad and, you know, you've done. So I did my master's, so that gave me credibility as well, saying that I went to Tsinghua, which is number top 2 school, and it's like the MIT of China. So essentially, you know, having that credibility where you can to leverage the fact that, you know, essentially is going to help you, right, stand out compared to your peers, right? So yeah.
Music's a little bit different. You know, obviously, you know, I get lots of mixtapes handed to me all the time. People looking for a job in music. For the record, I do not do A&R. I don't recruit artists, but I get lots of tapes anyway. Some of them are actually pretty good, but I have no idea if anybody got signed from those. But um, music is a weird industry, and it's a little bit like. I remember when I first worked in the U.S. Congress, and everyone told me, "Well, you can't get a job in Congress until you have Hill experience," and then there was this kind of circular approach. Music is very much like that. So I would say, you know, in an industry, you know, that is so kind of closed in that way. Uh, Getting in early, taking advantage of the internship opportunities. If that's your passion, you know, building that out will be super helpful. And frankly, you know, while we're stuck at home, you know, you know, one of the other things about COVID that has really happened is that there's been obviously music is a particularly young industry, so age is not a barrier, which is fantastic. And technology is incredibly important to us now. You know, we've been recording albums while we open some of our studios like Abbey Road or Capitol Studios in LA super early. Many of the other albums that we've been putting out that you've heard have all been conceived and recorded at home. And so the technology that people have used, you know, is incredibly important. And we've used a lot more young folks getting engaged early. You know, these are basic beginner jobs, but jumping in and having that on your resume, you're going to be so valuable to music companies anywhere in the world. You know, we have amazing stuff happening. If you want to get into music in China, there's such a demand for tech people and sound engineers and producers to help build out what is really an incredible opportunity to build out the Chinese music industry. You know, Europe is all adores American technology trained students coming in. So if you are looking at something like that, an industry like that, don't be afraid to jump in at a level that may even be a little bit below you, but that you recognize is going to be something of value when we do get to travel the world again, and you can present those credentials overseas. So that's what I would say. And I'm obviously, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to give guidance on some of those positions at Universal and otherwise.
Thank you all. That was a great segue. I was about to ask you all, panelists, if you would be comfortable sharing your contact information in the chat. If not, you can just say, find me on LinkedIn, whatever you prefer. But I don't think we'll get to all of our student questions today. So I'd love to have a way for students to follow up with you after this if they want to dive a little deeper or get their questions answered through email. I think we have time for at least, we'll try for two. I'm going to ask the first one. So if you seek an internship or a short-term position to just kind of see if you'd want to stay abroad longer than that, what's the best way to go about that? This is kind of two parts. Did you all know, and did you know that you wanted to stay abroad when you went abroad, or did you kind of figure it out as you went along? And take whatever part of that question you want to answer and go for it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I fell in love. I mean, the nice thing about studying abroad or doing an even if it's like a summer internship or, right, anyways, having some exposure, or even if you're traveling, like I have a lot of friends that travel through China and they'll go to, they'll then go to Thailand, or, they'll go to Vietnam, they'll go to Laos, they'll go to Cambodia, right? So if they're doing kind of a track of and they're going through the country that maybe they want to explore, that can also be a good way to kind of have a sense of, of the country beforehand. But again, I knew, because I'd studied abroad, so I knew that China was the right place for me. I don't remember where I was going with that, so maybe I'll let you guys take there. Yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought. It's late here. It's a little past my bedtime, so sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, Berlin was the first place I studied abroad. I did the Macalester program that had 2 cities, and I fell in love, and it was just my dream to return to Berlin, which I then did, like 5-6 years later. When I moved to Berlin, it was a completely different experience. Like, I was living in the boonies in Berlin, like working a job. I wasn't, like going to museums every day and then going to the bar until whatever. But I don't know. I can't explain what just drew me to Berlin, but it just ended up being where I felt at home, I guess. And that's why with Vienna, I never had that feeling, even though I moved there after graduation. That's why it was, even though I was there for 2 years and I had a good time, I was like, I need to get to Berlin. And so I took a pit stop in Erfurt, which is like not the world's greatest city. But I made it here, and I just feel like I had a gut feeling, and that feeling was right. So even though it's not the Berlin that I was on study abroad in, it's a great city. And I kind of already forgot the question, but one piece of advice in terms of like city specific, one thing that I could also recommend would be Facebook groups. So for example, in Berlin, there are a number of like international women in Berlin, Americans in Berlin, expats in Berlin. And you see questions all the time of people being like, hey, I want to move to Berlin, like, and I'm in this field. Can you give me any advice? And I don't know if people just have like a compulsion to talk. I know I do, but people love giving advice. They love answering questions. And so that's another approach, of just asking like literal strangers on the internet what they think about a city and what it's like living there, and just kind of seeing what other people have asked and shared too.
And I'll speak. You guys are amazing, because you've found homes abroad. I've found a home kind of traipsing the world, and so I would argue for those of us who find comfort being in a different country every week, and what that means. It's exhausting physically. It is terrible for your waistline, but it is so intellectually stimulating. it is so exciting culturally to see the comparisons and contrasts from week to week. And frankly, from seeing the universal themes, getting to work on things together with people from all over the world in multilateral circumstances, I find that just amazing, and that it's very different. It's not for everybody, but it is another way to explore working and living abroad. Those of us who live on planes. So I would say do that when you're young. It's really exhausting and it's exhilarating. And so many people, I think, go through their youth without having had that opportunity. If you get an opportunity like that, I'd say take it. You may not want to do it when you're older, when you're grounded by other things. And so take advantage of the opportunity to do it if you get it. It's really it's amazing, and frankly, it will restore your faith in humankind, to see how awesome people are all over the world, and how many great cultures and places, whether it's in music or sport or cuisine or sculpture, whatever it is that really drives your passion. It is the greatest pay that you can ever get, and then it'll stay with you for a lifetime. So I'd argue also, for those of you who want to work on the road, it can be super rewarding.
Thank you. I think that's a great note to end things on. If we were in person, I would ask students to give you a round of applause, but maybe we can use our little reaction sticker thingies. Yay. Okay, that's fun. Thank you all so much for joining us today, students and panelists. I think this was really insightful, really great conversation. I know we didn't get to all of the student questions that I was being chatted. So students, feel free to follow up with the panelists. A couple of them have dropped their emails in the chat, or you can find them on LinkedIn, or contact me if you want to get connected. But again, thank you all for joining us today. I hope you all stay well and safe, and hopefully you'll join us again soon for a similar event.
Thanks for having me. Good luck, everyone.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.